Howdy y'all, I am Ice Gold, and for today's video I am going to be re-ranking all of the schools in Wizard101 PVP, and I'm going to be doing it based off of how each school performs against all the others. There are some factors that I think will set some of these schools above one another, but I want to go ahead and make this matchup tier list first before I actually do the ranking, and there will be a timestamp in the description where I actually get to the ranking and actually show y'all what all the schools are, in my honest opinion, 1 through 7, and that's just what we're going to do today. So the last time I did one of these was the 26th of June 2024, uploaded on the 27th, where I did a matchup tier list, and that's based on how close they are. So as you can see, we've got tilt, lean, likely, safe, and one-sided. So the closest matchups are going to be up here in the tilt category and the lean category. These are generally what I call the swing matchups, because either school could reasonably win these. Likely is definitely favoring one school over another, but you know, the other school could still win. And then safe, you know, the school on the bottom shouldn't win, and then one-sided is like, you might as well flee. So that's where we're at. So I actually have my video from June, the end of June, up on my other monitor right now, so I will give some quick commentary on why I think some matches have shifted and how I think that affects the overall ranking of all the schools, just in general. And since the season is ending within the next few hours, I want to say, maybe a day and a few hours, I can't remember. I think it's the 14th when the season ends. So this is going to be the end of the season tier list, and I might try and do some more of these whenever major changes come out or whenever a season ends. So that's going to be the plan. So without further ado, we're going to start off with balance and death, and I think so. Okay, at the last one, I had this matchup here with the death being favored by a lean margin, because, you know, drains were still so good, but drains are not still so good anymore, and they have taken quite the tumble. Death has, you know, it's gone from the definitive number one to somewhere in the middle, and I think because of just how death is and how just cracked out balance is, this is going to be where the matchup ends up, with balance being favored over the death by a safe margin. I'll give it like a balance plus 30, which is the lower barrier for between likely and safe. So if a balance should win 30 more games out of 100, it will go into the safe column. So this is a swing from this up here to this down here. This is just a nutty swing. I would say this went 40 more games in favor of the balance with this drain change. So yeah, I mean, with just how good balance is naturally against weaknesses, that is definitely going to put this matchup in the safe category for the balance wizard. Next up, balance versus fire, and this is one that I actually had in the likely category for the fire, winning about 15-ish more games out of 100 than the balance, but recent developments have shown me that that has flipped on its head. I mean, it's like balance is just so crazy right now, and from what I've seen, balance, it is definitely favored against fire by a likely margin. This is no longer in favor of the fire. I originally had this, I originally had fire favored by a likely margin because of just how good it was against shields and how fire could reasonably shield a balance and still do fine with that. But yeah, balance versus fire. If a balance is using a lot of lore masters, then this is going to be just where it ends up. And then that whole Hydra pet nonsense, which is getting banned in the next patch, that also really helps balance against fire, but I'm not really basing it off of that. I think the balance, even without Hydra, is going to do quite a bit better against fire than fire would against balance. So this is another flip, the second so far from last time, so there is that. Next up, this is not a flip. This is the first one that isn't a flip. It hasn't even reduced in margin. There is talk that Supernova TCs might be getting banned, and if that falls out of meta for balance, because main deck Supernova is 60% accuracy, and you know, you'll fizzle that more times than a balance would want to. So if Supernova becomes, like, if it falls out of meta, then that is a prime opportunity for this matchup to go down to here, or maybe even here. Because if an Ice can brace a balance, then this matchup will definitely reduce. But for the time being, there is no good way for Ice to mitigate a balance's damage. So one-sided is where this will remain. Balance versus life. I originally had this as a leans balance, but in the time since, the margin has increased greatly. I think I'm going to put this also in the safe category. I'll give it like a balance should win like 35-ish more games out of 100. So it is safer than balance versus death. And I mean, you know, you've got cards like Gearhead, and balance typically runs storm accuracy, so Giga Heals are also kind of off the table. And yeah, I mean, balance is just going to shred a life. It's like this has moved out of swing matchup territory. So that is now 2 matchups that have moved from swing matchup territory down into like one school is very clearly favored. So yeah, fun game we play. So the next one up is going to be Myth versus Balance, and I had this in the likely category before. I think I had it at maybe Myth plus 20-ish, but I think that has reduced, and I think I'm going to call this the closest of the likely matchups, likely in this case being, you know, like the school on top wins between 11 and 29 matchups out of 100, or more matchups out of 100 than the school on the bottom. So I do think that Myth might get like that 12 to 15 range, something like that. We'll call it Myth plus 12, because Myth is still very, very good against damage mitigation, but I mean, a balance can just brace, and that's what sort of brings this down out of the safe category, because balance, like, mitigation is balance's whole thing, and it's like they also have the ability to mana burn, so it's like a Myth can't really set up a combo to deal with brace like they like other schools might be able to. But then, you know, other schools also just get completely rolled by balance for other reasons. So it's like Myth, it is still favored, but by slightly less than it was is where I'm getting at with that. Balance versus Storm, I think I had this at like balance plus maybe 50 or something, and I think that has reduced down to maybe balance plus 35-ish. I do think that the margin has reduced as Storms have started to lean a lot more on Catch of the Day, which is very, very strong and is one of the best spells just in PvP in general right now. So I think Balance versus Storm, while still safe for the balance, I am going to say that the margin has reduced by, honestly, a considerable amount. So, Balance versus Storm, I'm going to say, like I said, it's still safe, just not as safe as it was back at the end of June when I last made a tier list like this. Death versus Myth. This is, before I had this up here in the Tilt's Death column, but I think that with the Drain nerf, because Drains were how Death really stayed up on against Myth, I think that Myth has very clearly gotten the leg up on Death, because it's like, Shift is still a thing, so it's like Myth's legacy counters Death's legacy, and then Myth's new identity counters Death's new identity with, you know, weaknesses, and versus like a Stone Colossus, for example. So Myth versus Death, it's definitely in the safe category. I'm gonna call it Myth plus 40-ish, which is a major swing. It's a swing of just so much. So yeah, another matchup out of the swing category. We have definitely seen quite a loss in this. We've seen, I think, 3 matchups now fall out of the swing category, so that's pretty cool. So how about that, W-Wiz? Death versus Storm. This is the next one up, and I think that this one has reverted a little bit towards the Storm, but it's definitely still safe for the Death, and I think, because like weaknesses and Death's weakness identity is just so good versus Storm, and Storm has reduced it down by a little bit because of the Drain nerf, but Death's never needed Drains to completely just mop up a Storm. And I think that this has gone from, I think I put this at Death winning 55 more games out of 100 compared to the Storm. In the last ranking, I think that's gone down to 50, but it is still, like I said, you know, 75 to 25 games favoring the Death. That is still a lot, and I don't really need to say much more on that. Death versus fire. I had this in the likely category for the death, but you know, some of my experiences lately, I was trying to do some fire peeve, and it took me quite a while because I kept getting death wizards who would just like spam weaknesses. And now that death has to lean more into their weakness identity and use a bit more of their brains, it's like drains were. It's like a death spamming drains was easier to beat by a fire. Compared to a death spamming stuff like weaknesses, because now it's like we're back in the situation where schools that are better at countering weaknesses are good against death, so that like fire is not a part of that. So death is definitely going to beat fire by a safe margin. I think I had this maybe death plus 20 before, but now I think it is a death plus, we'll give it a death plus 35, just like Storm and Life. So yeah, death, it's very safe against fire. Don't really need to say much more than that. Fire versus life, don't worry about that. My voice is totally normal. Life versus fire, I had this as leans life, but I think I've seen enough to put this at like life plus 25 in this scenario. So yeah, it's like life is just too good against fire. It's like the weaknesses, it's like if a life uses weaknesses, then of course that's a problem the fire has to deal with, but life can also heal, and a fire has to really react to that. And with how prevalent and feeble has become, it's like counter the counters. Life is just really, really good at that. So life is going to get this likely matchup. It's going to come down. The margin is going to expand from, like, I don't know, life plus 5 to life plus 25 out of 100. So yeah, life definitely winning many more games out of 100 against the fire than what was previously put up here back in June. So next matchup, fire versus myth. This one I had favoring the myth by a lean margin, but I don't know. It's like, if Serpent still existed, I think fire would still have a leg up on myth, but I think just because it doesn't, I'm gonna put this favoring myth in the tilt category. This is a very skill-based matchup. You basically have to just like really go for the aggro, but because like a myth can base gen, that I think is going to set myth up against the fire. So myth, I think, barely has the upper hand, but a fire should win like 49 games out of 100, and myth should win 51. So that's what puts it in the tilt category. So it's like this could go either way, and if I could make a toss-up category, I would. But I mean, the way Flora, who made all of these emojis, did it is, you know, one school has to be on top. So I'm totally fine giving it an actual classification. So myth barely with the leg up on fire. This is a slight reduction from what it was back at the end of June, but yeah, I think like don't get it twisted. Myth is not favored against fire by a large margin by any means. It's much smaller than it was, and by much smaller I mean it goes from like, I don't know, myth plus 8 to myth plus 2. So yeah, myth I think is just barely favored against fire. That's how it is. So fire versus storm, I had this actually up here in the leans fire category. I think I put this here because I said like thermic golem was, or not thermic golem, but glacial golem was how fire would beat storm. But in my experience, storm has gotten much better at just like beaming fire, and I think I'm going to go ahead and put this down in the safe category, with storm favored by 30 games out of 100, so it just barely makes the cut into the safe storm category. But with spells like catch, and you know, it's like if storms run fire accuracy and spells, they can do, like, they can counter shields pretty well, so it's like golem isn't as much of a problem anymore. So yeah, this is definitely going to go to the storm by quite a large margin. It's honestly good to see that storm finally has a matchup that they can win by, you know, more than a lean margin. which is what we were at before. So, cool. Storm at least has one safe matchup these days, so that is very helpful. Next up is going to be Ice versus Death, and this one I had in the Leans Ice category. I think I said like Ice wins maybe 54 to 46 on the Death's end, but I think that has expanded just a little bit. I think we are looking at Ice plus 15-ish against the Death now because of the Drain nerf, and like Death, if a Death has to like really lean into the weaknesses, then Ice can definitely use that to our favor. And I have multiple times in my 50 Ice Games video, which should be out by the end of the week. That's what I'm aiming for. So Ice versus Death, I'm going to move this from the Leans category, favoring the Ice, to the Likely category, favoring the Ice. So the margin has expanded a little bit, and it's gotten out of swing matchup territory. But a good Death can still beat like an average Ice. So that's where I'm at on that. Next up, we got Ice versus Fire. I think... man, you're gonna see this on Friday. This, just where we're at, it's like Ice. I used to have this in the Likely category back at the end of June, still favoring the Fire by a likely margin by about 15 more games out of 100, but I think that's expanded quite a bit to 30. Which again barely puts it into the safe category because of Glacial Golem. And as you see here, Storm completely just murks Fire. That's no surprise, and Fire has to really react to that and set their deck in a way that can really help with Storm. And they pack, what they end up doing is they pack a lot of Glacial Shields and Glacial Golems. And while that helps marginally in the Storm matchup, it really locks down the Ice matchup, and there's not that many people playing Ice except for like me and maybe a couple others, but it's like a Fire using Golem is just always gonna just destroy Ice. It's like I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten a Fire just dead to rights, whether I'm running Storm accuracy or not, and then just a million Golems or Glacial Shields just pop up out of nowhere, and that is what ends up closing the match out for the Fire. So it's a very cheesy matchup, and Fire just has all the cheese in the world in that matchup. But yeah, that is going to be what puts this into the safe category, favoring the Fire, in my opinion. So Fire definitely has a big leg up on Ice right now, and it's all because they're setting for Storm. Storm is a bad matchup for Fire, but Ice gets caught in the crossfire, no pun intended, and it just makes the matchup so much less fun to play for the Ice. Yeah, I think this is gonna barely make it into the safe classification, even if the Ice is running Storm accuracy, because then it's like, you know, the Fire could just play He Don't Got It, and that's a whole thing. And yeah, this matchup is pretty abysmal. I'm gonna put this in the safe category, favoring the Fire. Life versus Ice. This is our second entry into the one-sided tier. I think that Ice has less of a chance against Life than Balance, so that's just how I'm going to order it. So Life versus Ice. The only feasible way that an Ice could beat a Life is if an Ice were to get like 12 shields on, and then the Life couldn't counter any of them, and then the Ice would have to Shrike, and then use 2 Lords of Winter into a Kelvin's Icy Gaze, under a Sleet Storm and a Balefrost, and Life's carry like 15 levels. So yeah, that's the Balefrost isn't happening. The Sleet Storm can happen, but the Balefrost is not, and if the Balefrost doesn't happen, then yeah, it's like even a Lord tree in Shrike is not going to do all of the damage that, you know, an Ice needs to in this matchup. So it's one-sided for the Life. It was one-sided for the Life back at the end of June when I made this list last. So yeah, there is no hope there. Myth versus Ice. This has... I used to say this was Myth plus 40, but I think that's expanded a little bit. I think Myth is going to beat Ice by, I think, 45 now. 45 more games out of 100. So, safe. Just as it was back at the end of June, it is still very, very safe for the Myth. So, Myth will just absolutely destroy ice, and that's just where we're at. So isn't that fun? So it's the margin has expanded here. As crazy as that is, I didn't think it could get any bigger, but it has. Ice versus Storm. This is an interesting one. I think I'm going to put this in the likely category, favoring the ice, just like I did back at the end of June. But the margin has reduced a little bit. I think it's gone from ice plus 25 down to ice plus 20, which I think will move it below the life versus fire. And yeah, it's like Storm's really gotten good, and ice has like a lot of the counters to it. But it's like, if a Storm is running fire spells to, counter shields and all that, and, Shrike is a thing that exists, it's like, if a Storm goes into Shrike, like, even against an ice, it can really bring it close. So, I definitely think that the margin has gone down a little bit, especially with, Storm spamming Berry Surprise. It's like, that can be a deciding factor as well. So it's like Storm does have things that ice fundamentally struggles with. Otherwise, ice would be blowing it out of the water. But ice does have a pretty good leg up. I think it's only 20 more games out of 100 now compared to the 25 that I thought it was before, but it is still Ice's best matchup in my honest opinion. Death versus Life, this was a safe matchup looking at my monitor, and I think that has gone down to like a Death plus 29, if I'm gonna be so for real. This has seen a closing of the gap. I can't remember where I put this before, but because of the drain nerf, it's like a life can honestly outlast death in a convoluted sort of way. So death is still very favored, and it's still one of death's better matchups, but I do think that it's going to go down to a likely margin. So it's just barely under the safe threshold. So like I said, death plus 29 here, so just barely under there. What's next? Life versus Myth. I had this as a tilt Myth before, but I don't know, I think I might Lives tend to use fire spells to counter shields. So, and like, you do need to do a lot of damage all at once to really counteract Life's heals. And then Myth also just doesn't run Storm accuracy, so Triton is sort of out of the picture. I think I am gonna say that this is a flip for the Life school here. Life has flipped this matchup to favor them, and I think that it's going to come down to a Leans Life matchup. So it is definitely not as bad as it was before. It's like Life is now favored by a little bit. I'd say maybe plus like 5 more games out of 100 for Life compared to the Myth. Compared to the Myth, which was winning by a tilt margin, which is like 1 to 2 games out of 100, more games out of 100 rather. So Life, I think, barely gets the leg up on the Myth school. So Leans Life. So we have 2 swing matchups. That's fun. Out of all of the wins that we've gone over so far. The next one up is going to be Storm versus Life, and I do think that this is, I'm going to say Storm plus 28. So it's a little less safe than Death versus Life, but I'm a little conflicted on that. Let's go ahead and say Storm plus 31 instead. So it puts it a little safer than these two, because Storm just fundamentally is very, very good against the Life school. This is quite the expansion of the margin that it was before. I had this in the lean category before, now it's in the safe category. So Storm versus Life, it's just, I mean, Triton is a thing that exists, Catch is a thing that exists. It's like a Storm, like Storm is the school that can overwhelm Life the best, and that, I think, is going to be what puts it into the safe category. But Storm's defensive stats and health is still very low, so Life can still bring it close, which is why, because it's like Storm being fundamentally that much better should put it way over here, but Storm, it just doesn't. So Life is going to, it's not going to win fundamentally, but it's not as bad as like over here. So that's what I'm getting at. What's next? Storm versus Myth. Okay, this is the last matchup, and I think that we finally have our last swing matchup. We have, I used to put this as a safe Myth matchup down here, but I do think that this has reverted quite a bit. I think this, the margin has collapsed for Myth. It's like, Myth is still very, very good. It's still a resist school with quite an extensive library. But in a Punch-Out, I think the Myth would win, and Punch-Outs is, like, that is technically what you see a lot of in this matchup, so I think a Myth is going to barely beat out a Storm. That's my opinion on that, so I'd say it's like Myth plus maybe 3 or 4 more games out of 100, if that makes sense, so it just barely gets above the tilt category, but yeah, it's not safe anymore. It is definitely not what it used to be. It's a reversion of, I think, 30 points towards the Storm. So there is that, and that is going to be the finished tier list for each school's matchups. But now it's time to think about what schools are the best, just overall. And so I think what we're going to get here is what we're going to obviously see at the very, very top of the list. We have Balance winning 3 matchups by a safe margin against Death, Life, and Storm, and then a one-sided matchup against Ice and a likely matchup against the Fire. The only matchup that it loses is the Myth matchup, which, you know, you could make a case that it's fallen into the swing tier, but yeah, Balance is going to be an easy number 1, and that's no surprise. Balance is definitely going to... It's risen up the ranks. It is the definitive number 1 now, and that's where we're at. So, pretty neat. Second up, I don't know. I think I might put Myth at number 2, just because, like I've been saying, you know, it is the best school against damage mitigation. So, yeah, it's like it beats Death and Ice by that much. It's like, some of these matchups are a lot closer, but I do think Myth, I can say with confidence, is the second best school right now. It can win its worst matchup here, which is Life. So, it's not as good as Balance by any means. It definitely has many more less favorable matchups, but yeah, I think we're gonna call Myth the second best here. For the third best, going into this, I was gonna say Death, and I think I might still say Death because it's very, very strong against Life, Death, and Storm. But it's also losing quite a bit to the schools that are most queued right now, which are Balance and Myth. And I think a Q nerf is how, or Q nerf in quotations, is sort of how some of these schools rise and fall. So I'd like to put Death at third, just fundamentally. But with how many Myth and Balance Wizards are running around, it's just not as good as I initially thought. And I think for that reason, I'm going to put Storm. As crazy as that sounds, I think I'm going to put Storm at third because it beats the most queued schools right now. Or what am I saying? It doesn't beat Balance. Dude, this is hard. I don't... I think... Dude, I don't know. I'm looking at this list and I'm like, maybe I do have to just bite the bullet and say Death is third best because Death's stats are still insane. Yeah, I think that's what I'll say. because Death does beat some of the most cute schools by a safe margin, being, you know, Fire and Storm. But it definitely loses to balance. It can beat the occasional Life Wizard. Nobody queues Ice. Yeah, I think Death I'm gonna put at number 3 here, and then following that, I think, is where we're gonna see Storm coming in 4th place, and then for 5th place. For 5th place, Life has 1, 2, 3 winning matchups. Gets Myth, Fire, and Ice. So, because Myth is queued a lot, I think I'm gonna call Life number 5, and then Fire at 6, because Fire just does not have any favorable matchups outside of the Ice matchup, and Fire stats are really not that great either. So it's like Fire pretty much just like dismantles Ice entirely. But that's kind of it, I think. Yeah, dude, I think Fire, I'm gonna call Fire the 6th best school, and then the definitive last place is Ice. Like, that is without question. I mean, both of the one-sided matchups have Ice losing, and then, you know, Myth obviously and Fire being in the safe matchup tier. So it's like there are 4 unwinnable matchups for the Ice, and then the 2 more winnable matchups. You know, yeah, it's like Death isn't queuing as much. Storm is queuing a lot, which Ice does do pretty well against, but yeah, I think that's where we're gonna leave it. I think the tier list here is gonna be S tier easily is just going to be balance, and then A tier we're gonna see Myth, and then the B tier is where we see Death and Storm. And C tier is Life and Fire, I want to say, and then skip D and E, and then put Ice in the F tier. So that's where I think we're gonna end off. I think that's enough analysis for today. So thank y'all for watching. Again, thank you to Decaflora on Tumblr. I'm not signed in because I don't think I have an account, but thank you to Decaflora for these cool little symbols. I really like them. They're really good for videos like this. So thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Gold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave 50 comments for the algorithm. My Discord is down in the description if you want to chat with me some more. And I will see y'all later.